Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Mem Zayin. We are going to start with a quick review and kind of put in perspective what we were doing yesterday. So we started with this Mishnah about the pregnant cow. And today we're going to get to just as an intro to two interesting things we're going to see today. One is, in general, how do we view pregnancy? How do we view the fetus within the mother's womb? We're not going to talk about humans. We're going to talk about animals. But I think as women who have a better understanding of pregnancy, we can view this in light. I think the sugya is going to be kind of interesting. Certainly some things we're going to ask at the very end of the sugya about how we view certain parts of the woman's body when she's pregnant. Is this on account of the fetus? Is it not? We'll get to that. And the other thing is really going to be about homeowners' responsibility. Like most people who own a home have liability insurance. What's your level of responsibility if damages happen to somebody in your house? And on what does it depend according to halacha? Okay, you can check your insurance policy and see if it has the same criteria. I don't think it does. But anyway, we're going to deal with that. That's the second topic for today, which is a super interesting topic. So now we're going to start with this second case in our Mishnah, where we had a case where a para who was pregnant, a cow, attacked a shomer and now has to pay damages. And we said that if we end up with this newborn calf right next to it, and we don't know if it was in the womb at the time or not, can you demand damages also from the fetus or from the vlad, actually the offspring, from the born offspring? So now we want to say basically, right, the halacha is you pay half damages from the cow and quarter damages from the vlad, from the offspring. So the reason for this quarter damages, we said, was because we're not sure. We don't know. There's a safek, and it's sumchus, which is mamonu b'taba safek. We split 50-50. So we don't know if the offspring was part of it or wasn't part of it. So we do the half, which is a quarter, because you were only liable half damages to begin with. Now, the simple reading of the Mishnah is not the way the Gemara reads the Mishnah, and that I wanted to clarify here. The simple reading of the Mishnah is, what happens? How do you pay damages? You pay half damages of whatever you did to the ox, right? So whatever that para, that pregnant cow did, or not pregnant cow, we don't know, did to the ox is what they pay half damages. How do you pay it? You pay it from the body of the para, right? That's usually what happens. And then you pay half damages. Now, the simple reading of the Mishnah seems to be that you pay the half damages from the cow. If you don't have enough, if that doesn't cover it, because the cow is not worth so much and caused more damage, and even the half damages is more, then you can also use the quarter damages. You can pay up to a quarter damages of the value of the offspring. But for some reason, the Gemara doesn't understand it that way. I can't tell you why, but the Gemara views this, or reads it very simply as, there seems to be a half damage payment from the cow, and a quarter damage is a payment from the offspring, which sounds like altogether you pay 3/4 damages, which they think sounds absurd. So Abaye came up with this explanation, which I'm not going to review the whole thing, but Abaye basically said, it seems that what's happening here is really a quarter means a half means half of what they were supposed to, which is a quarter, and a quarter means a quarter of what they were supposed to, which is an eighth, because they're each theoretically partners in the, potentially maybe were partners in it. So if they were both partners, then each one only has to pay half of what they would have paid, which was half. And the para will pay the quarter. And since there's a doubt about whether the offspring should pay the quarter, we split it in half and they pay an eighth. To which Rava said, and then, by the way, the owner loses out. And then we had a whole discussion at the end of yesterday's daf, which case exactly do they lose out on, right? It depends. But the owner will potentially lose out because they'll only get 3/8 rather than half, the owner of the ox. But Rava says it doesn't make any sense what you're saying, because it doesn't say a quarter, it doesn't say an eighth, it says a half and a quarter. So it can't possibly be. So Ela Amarava, we're going to start from Memvav and Mabet, 2 lines from the bottom. Ela Amarava Lo'olam bepara uvlad dechad. It was, and by the way, I forgot to say this. This is the important part, that Abaye says the reason why they're splitting it is because they have 2 different owners. It was a case where the person sold the cow, but kept the offspring for themselves. So there was joint ownership, and that's why each one can claim, go prove that I'm your partner, and each one can kind of get out of it that way, and that's why they end up paying less. But Rava says, no, we're talking about para vlad dechad. We're talking about the owner of the cow and the offspring were the same. V'hachi kamrina. And then we're going to read the Mishnah differently, different than the way I read it, different than the way Abai read it. And here's a different reading. Ita lepara, mishalem chatzi nezek mipara. If the para is there, now the truth is you could explain Rava the way we did also, the way I just explained it, which basically means we're going to go to the para first. Pay your damages from the para. If the para isn't there, or theoretically you could say, or if the para isn't big enough to be able to fully pay the damages, then mishtalim rivia nezek mivlad. Then you can use the offspring, but up to how much of the offspring? Not half, but a quarter, because we're not sure if the offspring was really part of it or not. So because of that, only in the case where there isn't a para, or the para doesn't cover it, and that's the way we explain the Mishnah, then you pay. Then you can use the vlad. So it's not that you pay from there and from there. It's only if you need to that you go to the vlad. Now they want to learn something from here. Tama, you can infer from this. The Tama right? This is obviously because the reason you only take a quarter from the vlad is because, and now we're going to isolate this and say, it's clear from here that what? The reason you can take only a quarter from the vlad is because we're not sure if the offspring was inside the womb of the cow at the time or not. But from there you can infer if it was obvious, like everybody saw that the para was still pregnant and saw the goring and then saw that the para gave birth, okay, after. If that was clear, then what can you learn from here? And here we're going to talk about pregnancy in general, how the halacha views pregnancy. Dahava vlad bahada, right? If it was clear that the vlad was inside at the time of the goring, kinagha, when she gored, mishdalen kule nesek mivlad, kule chatzi nesek. You could actually collect the entire half damages. It's a funny thing to say, the whole half, but the entire half damages from the vlad. Why? Imagine the para was dead, let's say, okay? And you want to take the arm and pay from the arm, right, of the para. Of course you could. The arm is part of the animal, right? You could take any limb you wanted of the animal. So therefore, we see here that if there's a para and its offspring, and the para caused damage, but the offspring at the time was in the womb, then you could pay just from the offspring if you wanted. The only reason why you can only take rev and nezek from the offspring, and we go to the offspring second here, is because we're not sure if the offspring was really inside the womb or outside the womb. But if it was obvious that it was inside, then obviously you could take chatzi nezek, and as if they decided that's what I'm going to pay with, they could do that. And Rava letame, and Rava goes consistent with his opinion elsewhere, to Amarava, Parashi Zika Koveh Mivlada. Okay, he actually says it somewhere else. This was an inference from here, but Rava actually says it elsewhere, that a para that caused damages, you could collect it if the para was pregnant from the offspring. My timer, why? Gufahi. Because we view the offspring as part of the body of the woman, okay, as of the mother. In this case, an animal, whether it's a birth also, a woman, the ubar, and this we see in certain sugyot, ubar yerech imo, they say it in humans. They say it's like the like a limb of the body in her body, okay? Like the yerech is the thigh. It's like a thigh in the woman's body. It's basically, while it's inside, it's considered part of the woman's body. However, Rava continues and says, Tarnigola, but if it's a hen that damages, Eino govemi beitzata, you don't collect from her egg. Why is that? My time up pirsha ba'almahu, and they make a difference between eggs that are laid. That's as if it's a foreign item in the body of the hen. That's not viewed as part of the body. Whereas in humans and in mammals, it would be part of the body. So it's an interesting, somewhat scientific distinction they're making. Whether it's science, that's how they view this difference between the hens and their eggs and the humans and the cows. For Amarav, Ein Shamin, we're going to get back to pregnancy soon in a few minutes, but now we're going to talk about Ein Shamin lepara b'fnei atzma ulevad b'fnei atzmo, ela Shamin livlad alav para. She'im ata'omel ken nimtza tamachlish tamazik. Okay, that was a long sentence I read without translating. Let's go through. When you have damages, now we're flipping the case. We're not talking about the second case in the Mishnah. We're back to the first case in the Mishnah. When a para who's pregnant gets attacked, okay, let's say we knew it was pregnant when it was attacked, and now they lose the fetus, and we know it's because of this. Or even if we don't know, we have to assess it, split the difference 50-50. how do we assess the value of the para and the value of the fetus, okay, or the offspring that she miscarried? So you don't say you owe the damages for the cow on its own, like here's what a cow would be worth, and an unpregnant cow, and here's what the offspring would be worth. Let's say this is 200, this is 50, and then you get 250, and that's what the damage is assessed at. Maybe you get half in this case. You don't do that because Ella, what do you do? Shamin livlad al gav para. The same way we said that a pregnant cow, the fetus, is considered part of the cow. So how do you assess damages? You assess damages, how much is a pregnant cow worth? And how much is a cow worth without being pregnant, right? A miscarried, a cow who miscarries. What is the value of a cow with baby, without a baby? And that's the loss, right? Or pregnant and not pregnant. That's the amount that we value it at. Now, if you lose the cow also, then it'll be also the value of the cow. But right now we're talking about how is the offspring determined? The offspring is determined not by what an offspring would be valued at if it were born or even just on its own. There is no such thing as a fetus on its own. It's only valued at the value of a pregnant cow minus, right, the value of a cow that's not pregnant. Why do we do this in this way? Because if you don't say that and you go the other way, then there's a very strange line. You're going to weaken the one who damaged. Basically, you're going to take money from him. You're taking too much money. And it's obviously going to come out more if you evaluate the offspring separately. So it's going to be hard on the one who damaged. Why do we care? They damaged. Why are we being so nice to them? We don't know. We're going to get back to this. But before we get back to it, we're going to say it's not just true about a pregnant cow. We're going to see this in two other cases. If someone cuts off the arm of a slave, we don't say, what's the value of an arm in the shuk? No, we say, what's the value of a slave with an arm? What's the value of a slave without an arm, right? How much can you buy a slave like that for in the shuk? Obviously, one who's missing an arm is going to be worth less in the marketplace. And then that's the amount of damage. It's the difference between that and that is the amount of damages you would pay. We're comparing very, very different things, right? One is birth of, loss of an animal. One is loss of limbs, right? A little hard to talk about these days with the war going on. And one is mazik sadeh shel chavero, which is if somebody damages your field. So let's say what does it usually mean? They ate, okay? Their animal came in and ate some of the fruits in your field. Now, let's say they ate 10 cucumbers. So you would think, the obvious, right? You would pay 10 cucumbers. But actually, he says no. You pay the value of a field with the 10 cucumbers and a value in your field with everything you have in the field, plus, in addition, the 10 cucumbers that they ate, minus the value of your field now that those 10 cucumbers are missing. And that's the value he pays, which again would come out to less damages. So the Gemara, Amalei Rav Acha Berei Rava the Rav Ashi. So this was said by Rava. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, says to Rav Ashi, I don't understand this. Idinahu, in other words, he assumed that when Rava said this, what Rava meant is the law is that you would just figure it out based on the offspring, and you would figure it out based on the fruit he ate, and you would figure it out based on the limb that's missing. But because he added this line, in order not to weaken the position of the one who damaged, we are more lenient. He says, I don't get it. Idinahu, if it's the law, then likush mazik. So yeah, the mazik has to pay more. And they're the one who damaged anyway. Why are we on their side? Why are we helping them? To which Rav Ashi answers, no, it really is the law. Why is it the law? Mishum da'amarle, because remember, the proof is always on the one trying to get the money. That's what puts the mazik in a stronger position. And the mazik, because they're supposed to be paying, and they say, well, prove I have to pay it. So they can say, Parama abrata aziktach, Parama abrata sheminalach. I didn't damage a cow and its offspring. I damaged a pregnant cow. So assess it based on a pregnant cow versus a non-pregnant cow. Okay, and that's why I damaged, you could look at it like this. I damaged one item. I'm not going to pay for two separate things. I'm going to pay for the value of that item, what it was worth then to what it's worth now. And basically, that's why this is really the law. Okay, and it's not that, oh, we're being nice to the mazik and we're making them pay less. No, this is the law. now here we get to the fun, as far as I think, the fun discussion about a pregnant woman. Okay, we all know you gain weight during pregnancy. Sometimes the weight is because of the baby. Sometimes the weight could be because you gained weight. So the following question is asked. You just have to laugh at this, right? Shita para dechad uvlad dechad. If the para and the vlad belong to the same person, pitma labal. I'm sorry, not the same person. If the para belongs to one person and the vlad belongs to another, this goes back to what Abaye had said. But this isn't related to Abaye. It's just saying, once we talked about this example, let's talk about this example. If, let's say, I own the cow, but let's say you sold me your animals. I own the cow, you owe the vladot. So now that cow gets, the cow with the vladot gets damaged, and we assess the damage. Now there's parts of the animal, there's different parts. There's the meat, there's the different elements of it. Pitma lebal para, the fact that the para was extra fat now because it was pregnant, is it on account of the pregnancy? Which means maybe it would go to the owner of the fetus, right? The offspring. Or is it on account of the para itself, right? When we gain weight, can we all blame it on the baby, right? On the fetus growing inside? No, sometimes we just gain weight because we eat too much or whatever reason. So basically they say no, extra fat in that body and the loss of that fat now that the animal died or whatever it might be, the fat is considered to the owner of the cow, not having to do with the owner of the offspring. But nafchamai, but size, the fact that the para is now much bigger, which means the animal is worth more when they're bigger, right? And we're trained in our society to think bigger is not as good, right? There were societies where bigger in women was also viewed very positively. So the fact that this animal is bigger in an animal, you can imagine, bulk is a good thing. Who gets that? So Rav Papa, and by the way, the bulk includes, number one, the size. It also, stretching, your skin stretches. So when you're an animal and your hide stretches, you now have more hide. So through pregnancy, the animal is going to be stretched, the hide's going to be bigger. So it's worth more. So who is that go to the owner of the para, whose hide it is? Or does it go to the owner of the vlad, who owns the offspring, and it's on account of the offspring that this has happened to the body? That's a very fascinating question. Rav Papa Amar, obviously this isn't related to pregnant women because there is no ownership rights and all that, but it's certainly not different ownership rights, although I guess one could come up with, where, what do you call surrogacy, or I don't know, you could maybe come up with interesting, you have to think about it. But Rav Papa Amar labala para, he says it's all part of the para, and therefore we're going to stick with that. Rav Papa, it's the cow. Rav Achabred Rav Ika Amar Holkin, he says we split, go back to Silkus, right? We split it 50-50, right? And it could be because of doubt, or it could be because we view it as they're both part of this, growth. So Hilchatah Holkin, and in fact, the halacha is we split it 50-50. Very interesting. Okay, now we're moving on to the next interesting topic, as I said, about homeowners insurance or liability, really, homeowners liability. So nowadays we would have insurance to protect us from this, but really homeowners liability. The way the Mishnah is going to split up, and this is really important to understand, and I apologize, I didn't have enough time to put a sheet together, but we're going to have 3 sections, basically almost completely parallel. Okay, we're going to have it with a potter, with leaving their pots. We're going to have it with someone leaving their fruits, and we're going to have it with someone bringing their animal. It's always going to be someone, we're going to have it be Ruth, who brings her items into Naomi's courtyard. Okay, and then we're going to have it's going to split into 2 things, where Ruth brings it with permission or Ruth brings it without permission. We're actually going to start with the without permission, and then we're going to go to with permission. Now, one thing that's not complete here, and the Gemara is going to immediately jump on it, is that there's going to be within each 3 sections, the kadar, the potter, the fruits, and the animal, we're going to have 3 cases. Now, even though I said there's with permission and without permission, there's going to be 3 cases of what happens. 2 in the without permission, meaning damage could be caused to Ruth's items, and Ruth's items could cause damage to Naomi's. That's going to be the 2 things. But then when we get to the with permission, we're only going to go back to the first case about what happens if Ruth's stuff gets damaged, but we're not going to get to what if Naomi's stuff gets damaged by Ruth's stuff. So there's something missing here in the format. Okay, if you didn't get it all, it's fine, because we're going to read this 3 times basically, and then you'll have the structure down pat. But I wanted to give it to you outside first. And again, it would be better if I had a chart, but I don't. Okay. So a potter comes in with their pots. Ruth comes in. She's a potter. She brings her pots into Naomi's courtyard without permission. And Naomi's animals come, break the pots. Patur. Naomi is obviously exempt because what was Ruth doing in her courtyard? So that's case number one within, right? We'll do A, B, and C. We're in A1. A2. Im huskabahen, if Ruth's pots cause damage to Naomi's animals, then obviously balak terot chayat. Ruth is going to be liable because what was she doing? Bringing her animals into Naomi's courtyard and letting them cause damage. That's crazy. So Ruth is liable for bringing her pots in, and her pots cause damage to Naomi's stuff. That's A1 and 2. Now we're going to go to A3, which is going to be parallel to A1. Okay, this is why it's a little tricky, and the Mishnah doesn't tell you everything, which is why I want to be clear. We're now back to the case where, in other words, what was the first case? Naomi's animals broke Ruth's pots. So now the question is, when we're going to move to Bereshut, im hichnis Bereshut, if Ruth had permission to bring her pots in, and after she got permission to bring her pots in, Naomi's animals broke her pots, then Bala Chatzir Chayat. Then Naomi becomes liable. Why does she become liable? It's a good question. Just because she did something nice. She gave Ruth permission to bring her stuff in, and now apparently she also assumed responsibility for them. So what we're going to assume, Kamma holds, is that, as we're going to see Rebbi disagrees with this at the end of the Mishnah, is that when Naomi said, yes, you can leave your pots in my house, what she meant was, yes, you can leave your pots in my house, and I will protect them from my animals. And therefore, from anything, we'll see how far that goes, okay? From how far does her protection go? It's going to be a question the Gemara is going to get into. But at least she's saying, I'm going to protect your pots. You can leave them here, and don't worry, they're safe here. And therefore, if her animals cause damage to them, she's going to have to pay Ruth. Okay, Rebbi's going to say, no way, no how. She never said, I'm watching them. She just said, yeah, you can do it. You can leave them here, but she didn't say, I'm protecting them. So that's going to be a different opinion, but right now we're in the Tanakh. So now we're going to see those three cases again and again. What case don't they discuss? This is important to remember for later. What they don't discuss is what happens if, when Naomi gives permission to Ruth to leave her pots, Ruth's pots damage Naomi's animals. Is Ruth responsible or not? Okay, so they don't discuss that case. And the assumption is, I'll just already tell you, because while we're in this, so you see where the Gemara is going to go, because it brought up a case where she brought it without permission, Ruth is going to be liable in that case if her pots cause damage. The assumption is going to be, even though it didn't say so in the Mishnah, that if she brought it in with permission, she wouldn't be liable. Okay? So we're going to get to that later. We're now in B, case B. Ruth brings her fruits into the Baal Habayit. This is basically the same thing. She brings them into Naomi's house, shelo bereshut, without permission, va'achatan behemto shel Baal Habayit, and the owner's animals eat them. Okay, Naomi's animals eat the fruits, so basically causing Ruth a loss. Patur, Naomi doesn't have to compensate Ruth because what was Ruth bringing her stuff into Naomi's house? V'im huskamahen, and if, right, not her house here, it's a courtyard, it doesn't really matter though. V'im huskabahen, if the animal got hurt from the fruits, we're going to have to discuss. Rav later is going to say it depends how the animal got hurt. Okay, we'll get into that later. But if the animal got hurt by the fruits, okay, let's just say, I'll go with Rav already. Let's say they slip on, right, banana peels, okay? They slip on the bananas. Bala perot chayav. So Ruth is liable for the damage caused because she wasn't allowed to be in there. You already know where this is going. If Ruth had permission, then bala chatzir chayav. If Ruth had permission and the animals then destroyed her fruits, then obviously Naomi is going to be liable. Again, it's not necessarily obvious, but from what we said before, Tanakh basically said, when Naomi said, bring your fruits in, what she meant is, I'll protect them. And here, they weren't protected. Hichnis sholo, case C. So now Ruth brings her ox. Okay, so we had pots, we have fruits, and now we have oxen. Yeah, there's all different opinions why we had to bring all the three cases. I'm not going to get into that today. So Ruth brings her ox into Naomi's courtyard. Moving now to Amud Bet. Shelo bereshut, without permission. And one of the animals in Naomi's field bites or damages Ruth's animal. Patur, obviously she's exempt because what were you doing in my field? This goes back to things we learned in the beginning, right? Bereshut hanizak, right? If Bereshut ha-mazik, you bring it into the property of the person who damaged, right? You're not liable. The owner's not liable. Nagach hu shorosh balabayit. If Ruth's animal goes in without permission and damages the balabayit, this is Reshut hanizak, right? Goes into someone else's territory and causes damage. Obviously, Ruth is going to be liable. Chayav. Here we get a little bit more. So all of a sudden, it's not fully parallel. We're going to have some extra cases we didn't talk about. Nafale borot. If the shomer falls into a pit so Ruth's animal falls into a pit in Naomi's property. And because she fell in, it was water people were drinking, and now that the disgusting animal fell in, and bacteria on it, whatever it is, destroyed the water, hayav, obviously Ruth is liable to compensate Naomi. If Ruth's father or son was in the pit at the time, and the animal falls on them into the pit, and Ruth's animal, and causes their death, Mishalem et kofer. Obviously, Ruth has to pay the kofer, the ransom payment. So now we just added a few more things. And back to the case 3 now, in C3. Im hifnis bereshut bala chatzer chayav. But if Ruth, and this goes back again to the parallel to case 1, if Ruth brings in her ox with permission, and Naomi's ox gores Ruth's ox, then obviously she's liable. Naomi has to compensate Ruth for the damage. Because again, assumption is Naomi accepted it upon herself to watch the animal. Rebbi Rebbi says, I told you that Rebbi was going to come. At the end of our Mishnah, Rebbi comes and says, what are you talking about? Until Naomi says, I'm watching your animal, right? Just because she was being nice and said to Ruth, you could bring your animal into here, or you could bring your fruit into here, or you could bring your pots into here. She wasn't accepting to watch them. Okay, so now we're moving to the Gemara. And as I told you before, let's try to remember. They're going now to case 2 in all these cases, or really you could just start with the Kadar, the Balak Derot. That's the case we're going to talk about, but it's really true for all of them. Like I said, case 1 has its parallel in case 3, right? We really should have 4 cases in the Mishnah. It should be, 1, 2, and then 1A and 2A or something. It would basically be Birishut, and Shalo Birishut and Birishut, two things that happen, right? Either what Ruth brought in got damaged, that we have Birishut and Lo Birishut. And then we have, what if Ruth's items that she brought in caused damage to Naomi? And for that, we only have case 2. We don't have the parallel. We only have it in Shelo Birishut. If it's without permission, she's liable. But even though the Mishnah didn't say so, we assume, and this is an assumption we make in the Mishnah, that since if Ruth brought it in without permission, she has to pay damages if she causes problems to Naomi's stuff, then obviously, if she had permission, she actually wouldn't have to pay. We're assuming it's the reverse, the inverse. So that's what the Mishnah said, the Gemara says here. Tama, the Shelo Birishut. Okay, it's hard to know what they're talking about, but that's what they're talking about. Case number 2, in all these cases, the second possibility where Ruth causes damage to Naomi's stuff. The reason why she's liable is because she didn't have permission to be there. Ha birishut, if she brought it in with permission, lo mechayev ba'al k'derot b'niskei be'emto d'ba'al ha'chatzer. It sounds like if Naomi said to Ruth, you can leave your stuff here, then when Ruth's stuff damaged, she wouldn't have to pay the damages to Naomi's stuff. V'lo amrina, what don't we say? Now, this is an interesting thing that I don't know that you would have thought of, but you might have thought, and we'll have to think about why this is. We don't say kibule kabil ba'al k'derot niteuta de behemto de ba'al ha'chatzer. The same way that Tanakama said that when Naomi gives permission to Ruth to leave her stuff, Naomi's basically saying, I will protect your stuff from my ox goring it or my animals eating it or whatever it might be. In that same way, you would think, logic would state that in the same way you would say, whoever says that would say that when Naomi gives permission to Ruth to leave her stuff, Ruth is leaving her stuff while saying, I will protect my stuff from damaging your stuff. Just like Naomi said, I will protect my things from damaging your things. Now, why would that be? There's a few reasons. First of all, it could be that once Naomi gives permission to Ruth to be there, they become partners. And then as partners, they're basically each going to be responsible to make sure their stuff doesn't, right? It's a partnership. Or you could call it something more like a social contract, which is you're being nice to me, Ruth says to Naomi, and watching, making sure that my stuff will be protected in your field. Well, if I'm putting my stuff in your field and you're letting me, I'll obviously make sure that my stuff doesn't ruin your stuff. Okay. So either because it's a partnership or because it's a matter of just basic, like a social contract, basic niceties. If you're going to do that for me, I'll do this for you. And that's the assumption, which means the fact that that's not the case, because Ruth doesn't accept responsibility here, according to this Mishnah, for damage her pots cause, only Naomi does. Well, it's confusing then. The fact that line 2, case 2, which we infer from a case 4, even though there wasn't a case 4, the inference of case 4 is Mane Rebbi, must be Rebbi. Because what does Rebbi hold? Unless you say so, you're not accepting responsibility. And that must be why Ruth isn't accepting responsibility, because in the absence of that, Ruth should be accepting responsibility just like Naomi did. So it must be Rebbi, Damar Kobastama Loki Bella Lenetiruta, right? If you didn't say you're accepting responsibility, then you didn't, and Ruth never said it. But that obviously makes no sense to say it's Rebbi, because then case 2, which infers case 4, is Rebbi, but Ema Seifa, but case 3, right, number 3 in all these cases, Im Yichnis Bereshut Baal HaChatzer Chayav Atan LeRabbanan DeAmre B'Stamanami Kibule Kabel Ale Netiruta. You're ending up with case 2, which infers case 4, is Rebbi. Case 3, which says anytime Naomi gives permission, she's accepting responsibility, is Rabbanan, is the Tanakama, it's the rabbi's position. That makes no sense. And all the more so, the 2, look at structurally at the Mishnah, we're going to have 2 is Rebbi, because it infers 4, which is Rebbi. 3 is the rabbis. And then at the end of the Mishnah, it says, Rebbi Omer B'kulani no chayav ad shekabel bayit lishmor. So you're going to have Reisha v'Seifa, Rebbi, Mitziata Rabbanan. We have this zigzag in the Mishnah. Rebbi, then it goes to rabbis, then it goes back to Rebbi. It's very hard to say the Mishnah reads that way. Well, Rabbi Zera doesn't think so. We've seen this kind of thing before. Amar Rabbi Zera, Tavra, Misha Shanazo, Lo Shanazo. Break, Taf and Shin switch in Aramaic. Tavra is Shafa, break it. Okay? Break the Mishnah into parts. View it as separate parts. The one who said this didn't say this. These are separate lines that got put together, but they really have different authors, and it shouldn't bother you that it zigzags back and forth between Rebbi and the rabbi. Case 2, which in first case 4 is really Rebbi, that Ruth doesn't accept responsibility unless she says I am, and that's why she's not responsible. Case 3, which says that Naomi accepts responsibility automatically, is the rabbis. That last line in the Mishnah is Rebbi again. Doesn't bother us, okay, even though that's a very hard answer. But Rava gives a different answer, which I think is a more compelling answer. Kula Rabbanan. And now he's going to make a good distinction here, which is what? Ubireshut shmirat kterot kibel ala baal hachatzer va'afilu nishberu beruach. Okay, this line is a little bit complicated, and there's different ways to understand it. Okay. Rashi says, afilu nishbera beruach. 1 second. Right. Rashi says this, the following. Rashi says, what is this basically saying? Okay, let's read the words. Rava says this is all the rabbi's position. Okay, forget the 2 what we infer 4. Yes, 2 what we infer 4 is true, but there's a distinction. There's a difference between Ruth and Naomi here. What's the difference? Because why did we say Naomi's liable once she says, Ruth, you can leave your pots here? She's going to be reliable if her animals destroy the pots. Because b'shmirat shmirat gederot kibel alav baal hachatzer. When Naomi agreed, she accepted responsibility. What kind of responsibility? They add, which seems totally unnecessary here, afilu nishberu beruach, even if the pots didn't get destroyed by her animals, but even if they got destroyed by the wind, she'd be liable. She's basically accepting all responsibility. Now, the main part is missing here, but Rashi adds it, in afilu nishberu beruach, Rashi says, aval bal kterot lo kabila le'midi. But the owner of the pots, Ruth, she never said anything, right? Notice she didn't make any declaration. Naomi's the one who said, oh yeah, bring your pots in. She gave permission. Ruth never said anything. So when she said, I'll accept responsibility, she says, I'll accept responsibility. Ruth never said that. Ruth didn't accept any responsibility. And that's the difference. In other words, when Naomi said, and by the way, there's logic to this. Why? Why would one accept responsibility, not the other? First of all, Naomi's the only one who actually said something. Okay, so we can say, okay, you didn't say I'm accepting responsibility, but you did say leave your pots, which basically means I'll accept responsibility. That's one difference. Another difference is that when Naomi leaves her pots in Ruth's house, where does Ruth live? Ruth leaves her pots in Naomi's house. Where does Ruth live? Not there, right? So when Naomi says, leave your pots in my house, she can accept responsibility to watch them because she's there. But, right, like imagine you drop something off at your friend's house, say, can you watch this for me? And your friend says, yeah, like obviously, can I leave this here? It actually makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I mean, can I leave it here and can you watch it while I'm gone, right? That lots of times we say, oh, can you just keep your eye on this while I'm gone? And they're there, you're not there. That's the whole point. But Ruth can't accept responsibility for her pots causing damage if she's not even there to watch over them. So that's a possible reason to distinguish. But there's others who give a better explanation, I think, than Rashi, which is they complain and they say the ikar is chaser min hasefer. If what you're saying is we're distinguishing between Ruth and Naomi, then why didn't the Gemara say that? All the Gemara said was focusing on Naomi. It didn't say anything about Ruth. And then it makes a lot more sense to explain it this way. What they're basically saying is, let's read the words again. And also the words were totally unnecessary. What they have to do with anything? But according to the second explanation of how to read this is, Naomi took upon herself to watch the pots from every possible scenario, which is going to include, right, even if they break in the wind, not just if her animals break them. Now, even here, you're missing the main point. But the main point is what? Even if, what kind of responsibility? Even if Ruth's pots cause damage, Naomi's willing to accept responsibility for that. In other words, all the responsibilities on Naomi. That's why. It's not that Ruth didn't accept responsibility. It's that the whole point of Naomi saying, I'm going to let you keep your stuff here means I will accept total responsibility, not only for damage caused to your pots, but also damage your pots caused. And then that's actually fits a lot better with what's going on here and why this would all fit according to the rabbis, because it's not that Ruth accepted, there's no reason to think. And then it goes back to explaining, why did we even think Ruth accepted? She didn't really, right? There was no reason. I had to explain it's social contract, some sort of tit for tat, but really there was no reason to think that. Okay, so that was the first thing we did with our Mishnah, was make this inference from case 2, which seemed to mess up the whole flow of the Mishnah, but we resolved it. And in 2 ways. One is really it zigzags back and forth, the different opinions, or the second is there was no reason to have thought that in the first place. Now we're going to go back to Rav, which is, we're now in case B, the fruits, and we're in case 2 of B, which is the fruits cause damage to the animals. And Rav is going to qualify this and say, Lo shanu ela shehu chlika behem. What kind of damage? As I said before, that the animal slips on the fruits and gets hurt. And then if Ruth came in without permission, she's responsible. Avalachla patur. But if the animal eats them, then she's exempt. Now, this is a very good question. Why the animal eating them? My taima. The Gemara simply says, Ruth can say, why they eat my, okay, what does it mean, by the way? It means the animal ate them, got sick from whatever they ate. Not everything the animals eat is healthy for them. Ate the fruits, got sick, and died. And then Ruth can say, what, you're going to make me responsible for that? It's true, I shouldn't have left my fruits in your field, but your animal shouldn't have eaten them. Okay, now, why should this exempt? So first of all, you could say, well, the animal did an action, right? Slipping is an accident. That happened to the animal because I left my pots there, or because Ruth left her pot. But the animal eating, the animal went ahead and did an action. That's the animal's fault, not my fault. Okay, that's one thing. That's Tosfot. Tosfot Reed says, actually, it's grama. You can't make me liable because the animal ate, that was action number 1, and that caused their death, which is action 2. In other words, that's already indirect damages. It's not that eating it, right, they ate it and died. They ate it, and later that caused their death. It's already indirect. It's another possible answer. There's a lot of debate here exactly why this would be exempt, but we'll leave it at that. So comes Rav Sheshan, he doesn't like this statement at all, and he says, Amar Rav Sheshan, Amina kinayim v'shachiv Rav Amar lahashmata, which could be read in 2 ways, and the simple reading is, Rav was sleeping, he must have said this, because this makes absolutely no sense. Now, some people think it's a critique of Rav, whoa, you sleeping when you said this? What kind of a ridiculous thing? Some people say it's out of respect. Perhaps he was sleeping, we all know when we're half asleep, we say kind of things that make no sense. So it must be he was mumbling something and it came out all wrong. And, because Rav is so great, there's no way he would have said this if he were really awake. And it's actually a way of respect. But either which way, right, this is a statement we've seen a lot in the Gemara, this kind of statement. Now, why is he upset with this? Because he says it goes against an explicit right. Ditan. Hanoten sam hamavet lifnei behemat chavero patur midinei adam v'chayav b'dinei shamayim. Okay, we're not going to get into this whole thing today, but maybe we'll deal with it another time, which is there's a concept where and we've seen this before, where in a court of law, we can't rule against you, but, we assume God will punish you for it. It's not like it's a good thing you did, but we can't punish you in court of law. So what happened? You put poison in front of the animal. Now, we all know that animals eat things that are put in front of them, right? So you put poison in front of an animal, but we can't make you liable for the fact that you put this poison, even though the animal, right? Because in the end, right, the animal ate it. Now, what do you see? This seems to say the same thing. It's the animal's fault for eating it. But no, it's true, but it's specifically in this braita because it's Sam Hamavet who delo avidid achla. Now, what's the issue? The issue is most animals don't eat poison. So if you put poison in front of them, it's the animal's fault for eating it. But it sounds like if it was regular food, but if it was fruits that you put in front of the animal, then the animal will be liable, meaning, again, if the animal ate the fruits and died on account of them, they weren't poisonous, it would sound like you should have expected the animal would eat them, and therefore it's your fault. And that goes against what Rav said. Right? You could have said, why'd you eat it? I didn't tell you to eat them. So, Amre, they say to answer this question that Rav Shesha raises against Rav, instead of saying, yeah, Rav must have been sleeping, they say, no, you misunderstood Rav Shesha. Huadin, that's why you have to watch what you say sometimes. You say, what you're saying is ridiculous. Often it's you who didn't understand properly. Well, again, maybe there are two ways to understand. Huadin da'afilu peronami patur midinei adam. Fruits, actually, you would also be. Why did it say sam hamavet then? We thought it said sam hamavet poison because it was excluding a regular case, but no, it includes all cases. Why did it say sam hamavet? Hakamashmalan da'afilu sam hamavet nami dilavidi da'achla chayav b'dinei shamayim. The focus was on the fact that you will be liable in the court of the court of heaven, meaning God will punish you for this, even though the animal shouldn't have eaten poison, but because they know the difference usually. But come on, it's your fault, okay? Even though the animal shouldn't have eaten it. And then it's no different. For regular food, it would be the same thing. You're not really liable in a court of law, just like our Mishnah said. Just like Rav said, really. Right. The Mishnah said you're liable, but Rav said not if they eat it, because eating is their fault. You can't punish you in a court of law. And then that would match. Or the sam hamavet. Now, sam hamavet could come in different forms. Sam hamavet could look like a poison, or it could be like regular leaves that look like other food. And then it's the same thing as payroll. In other words, how does the animal, I said before, the animal knows to distinguish. How does the animal know to distinguish between something that looks like food and happens to be poison? So then it means anything you put that causes their death could be something poisonous, could be something else. But if it causes their death, then again, we can't make you liable because the animal ate it, and then it fits perfectly with Rav. There are going to be 3 questions against Rav. So now we're on question 2. Ruth brings her wheat kernels into Naomi's house. She wants to grind them. Now, she does it without reshut. She has no permission to come into Naomi's garden, but she goes in anyway into her courtyard. And Naomi's animal eats them. Patur, okay, she's liable. Now, if her wheat that she brought in causes damage to the animals, now the assumption right now is, since we just said if Naomi's animal eats them, she's exempt, they assume that it then means, but if by eating them she got damaged by them, then then Ruth is going to be liable. Now, this goes against because it's damage through eating. Now, it didn't say damage through eating, but they assume here damage through eating. Ruth could say, why am I paying for your animals that died by eating my wheat? I didn't tell them to eat my wheat. That's what Rav said. So Amre, they say, why did you assume that's what it was talking about? It's no different than our Mishnah. On our Mishnah, Rav said, it's im huska meant if they slipped. Here also, it could be if Naomi's animals slipped on Ruth's grains. And that's what happened. So that's a very fine answer, to which the Gemara says, Udikare lama karela. Why were they even asking this question? Why did they even think to distinguish between this case and the Mishnah and use it as a question against Rav? So remember, Rav limited our Mishnah in the same way he limited the Mishnah, limit this braita. Well, Amar lecha, they could say, Bishlama matnitin katani, and they're going to do a little grammatical small thing here. or not grammatical, but syntactical. Im huska bahen. In the Mishnah, it said, if he's damaged by them, which meant by the fruits, which meant by slipping on them. There you could say shuch lekaben. Aval hacha katani im huska v'lo katani bahen. It just says, and if they get damaged, which sounds like in the process of what they were just doing, which is eating them, and it doesn't say the word bahen, on them. So therefore, they thought it was referring to the previous line. And the other opinion, who didn't explain it that way, says obviously it doesn't make a difference whether you have the word bahen or you don't have the word bahen. It doesn't really make so much of a difference. And therefore, in the end, they explained it the same way they explained the Mishnah. So we were just trying to figure out what was even their thought in bringing this as a difficulty. Third source is difficulty on Rav. Tashma, let's learn from here. Now we're going to have a bit of an opposite case. Ruth brings her ox into Naomi's house, shelo b'reshut. Okay, so far, so same thing. But achal chitim v'hitriz umet patur. Now, if Ruth's animal eats wheat, gets diarrhea from it, and dies, Naomi's exempt. Because why? Ruth came into her field without permission. V'im hichnis b'reshut. Now, here comes the key. If Ruth had permission to bring her animal in, and then the animal ate and died from the eating, then Naomi's going to be liable. Right? Why? Naomi could say to Ruth, what was your shore doing eating in my field? Yes, I gave him permission to come in, but I didn't say he can eat. And it's the same thing we made before, right? Why? Now it's different because in the other case, it was flipped. Who was the owner and who got damaged, right? There was Ruth brought her stuff in and caused damage to Naomi. Naomi's animals ate it. In this case, it's Ruth's animal eats what's in Naomi's field after Naomi gives her permission to be there. It's not exactly a parallel case, but it is a similar concept that Ruth doesn't have that claim. Naomi can't use that claim of why'd your animal eat. So now we're going to explain why this isn't a difficulty. Amarava, bereshut ashalo bereshut karami. Now it's not just that Ruth and Naomi were flipped. But you're taking a case, the first case that we've been discussing until now was when Ruth had no permission to come in. And you're asking against a case where Ruth had permission to come in. Bereshut, mirat shora, bereshut, if she comes in bereshut, what does that mean? Why is Naomi going to be liable, even if Ruth's animal eats Naomi's stuff and dies from it? If she dies from it, Naomi's going to be liable. Why? Remember, that's the whole question. To what extent of liability does Naomi accept when she says, Ruth, you can leave your ox here? She accepts all responsibility that I'll make sure your animal doesn't die. I'll make sure he doesn't choke on his food. I'll make sure he doesn't get diarrhea from the food he eats, right? All of that. She accepts all of those responsibilities, and that's why she's going to be liable. But it has nothing to do with what Rav was talking about. It was totally flipped case. Flipped who was what, and also flipped reshut and lo bereshut. So you can't really ask that question. Okay, we're going to end with this last question. Now, this could be, even according to the rabbis, that anytime Naomi says, bring your stuff in, it's accepting responsibility, or it's Rebbi, when you say, I'm accepting responsibility. The question is, how far does the responsibility go? Is it just that, what the case in the Mishnah was, my dog won't bite you, my ox won't attack you, that kind of thing? Or odilma afilin da'alma kabila, and this is what we've been discussing. Or is it from the wind, or is it from any kind of damage? To what extent does it go? We'll stop here and we'll try to see how they try to answer this question. So a quick review of today's daf. We started with the Chatzi and Revi Nezek. We've explained that Mishnah the way Rabbi explained it. From there, we got into all sorts of issues of pregnancy and how do we view the fetus in the womb of its mother, right? Whether mother or mother cow, difference between a hen and that in terms of pregnancy, stretching, and all the big and the size and all that. We had some interesting questions. Who does that really belong to? Is it from the para, or is it from the fetus, or the offspring eventually? Then we got to these cases of liability, homeowner's liability, and the liability of someone who brings something into someone else's house and wreaks havoc there, and what's their responsibility, who's responsible in which case, what are the differences between birashut, shelo birashut, if you had permission to come in, you didn't have permission. So I said, I don't think that liability insurance really matters. The truth is it must, but I don't know how it fits into regular liability insurance and your homeowner's insurance if somebody comes into your house, unexpected. Where do we put that? What are the lines drawn? And then we had this other really interesting thing, which is if you say, yes, you have permission, Does that mean I will watch it also? And then you could end up being actually responsible for things that go on by accepting that responsibility. And you have to accept that responsibility in words, according to Rebbi, according to the rabbis. It's implied in what you said. And from there, we got off on some questions. We have Rav, who limited part of the Mishnah. We did that other inference in the Mishnah, the fourth case, which didn't say who's that go by. How do we explain that? And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a good day and hoping for some good news here.